Welcome to the Matt Kuda Photography Podcast, a podcast about nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 24, Beginning Wildlife Photography, Trials and Tribulation. And with me today is my brother, Rick Kuda, who is kind of coming at us today from a novice perspective, getting into kind of taking the digital photography to the next level and all the trials and tribulations that go along with that. So welcome to you, Rick.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, so let's move on to the In the News segment. Sony has introduced yet another camera, the Sony A6500, and they are putting out right now about one camera every 11 months, and that's just a staggering, really. It's very much the same as the Sony A6300. It does have a 24.2 megapixel sensor, which is typical for the APS-C sensor size these days. It has 425 autofocus points. That's killer. It's got a hybrid AF system, which combines the contrast detection and phase detection. And phase detection is what Canon shooters are used to using, and that's a totally different, faster autofocus system. It shoots at 11 frames per second, which is impressive, but even more impressive is the fact that it shoots at 8 frames per second in live view. It has what sets this camera apart from the A6300 is that the A6500 has 5-axis image stabilization built into the body. So you no longer have to worry about having image stabilization in your lenses. It's now in the body. So that right there made the price go up a few $100. It has 4K video, of course. It has touch focus, which is very similar to what I guess the Canon 80D would have on the back, where you can touch the screen during video and focus the camera. It has silent shooting, and it has an improved menu system. Now, the silent shooting to me is a big one because, as wildlife photographers, when we're shooting birds or whatever wildlife it might be, I have seen birds fly many times because they hear my shutter. Actually, they're more afraid of a shutter, studies have shown, than a flash. And so I don't know why Canon doesn't get it right with their shutters. Their shutters are extremely loud, and oftentimes I've had birds fly and not come back for an hour because of a shutter. So I applaud Sony for this camera. I applaud them for coming out with something so quickly, because what does that do? That makes the used market cameras go down in price. Every time they come out with something new, we get lucky and it goes down. That's pretty much it on the Sony A6500. Would I recommend this camera? If you're already in a system and you're deeply invested in that system, I see no reason to go to Sony. If you're new, if you're a beginner, if you're just starting out, you don't have a camera, then I think the A6500 is probably a good choice, or even the A6300. The problem is with this camera for wildlife, and a lot of wildlife and sports shooters complain about this, is its form factor. It's simply so small that when you put a large lens on it, like a 600, the balance is thrown off completely. And a lot of people complain about that. It just doesn't feel right. That's the way they explain it. It just doesn't feel right. I think Sony's are just fabulous. I think they're really knocking them out of the park. I think they're making Nikon and Canon look like slobs. I'm looking forward to the future. And I may at some point actually switch. I mean, that is a possibility. It's unlikely. My head is slowly being turned to the Sony camp, but it's very, very slowly. Okay, so that's it for the In the News segment. So let's move on to the kind of the meat of this podcast. And this is one of these things that I think a beginner is going to benefit from, and I also think that an advanced photographer will benefit from, because a lot of the things that happen when you're first starting out, we kind of forget about. I mean, something as simple as exposure and so forth is a real challenge. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring Rick on here today and just kind of pick his brain on what's going on with him and some of the things he's had to deal with. So Rick, let's get right into this. Let me start with just a basic, where did you come from in photography? What got you interested in it? And just kind of give me a background of where you've been.
All right. Well, I got my start in photography, not serious photography, but got an interest in it with my first Kodak telematic instant camera, or not instant camera, but it was those 110 Kodak ones. I took pictures with it. I remember going down on vacation, the USS North Carolina, and taking pictures, and I just had a blast doing it. So it's kind of been a hot and cold thing for me. I do it and then not do photography. But when I was in high school, or just out of high school, my parents bought me a 35 millimeter camera for Christmas, and from that point on, I was taking pictures off and on, a little more than I had been. But when I got married, my wife and I would go out to the country in the fall, and that's where I took a lot of pictures, because it's just the way the lighting was, the color of the leaves. It just has that feel-good effect. And, I was into art a little bit in high school, and it promotes that artistic view of things. And like a certain scene gives you a certain feeling. And that's how I got into it. Plus, I love the outdoors. I was a fisherman for a long time, and I just enjoyed all that. So, photography is one of those hobbies that crosses all hobbies. If you have an interest in aircraft, you can take pictures of aircraft. If you have interest in wildlife, you can take pictures of wildlife. If you like, reenactments like you did there for a few years, you can take pictures of that kind of thing. It's a hobby that covers all hobbies. If you're a sports fanatic, there's all kinds of games you can go and take pictures at. And that's where I'm coming from, is I just enjoyed the beauty of the outdoors. And that's where I got my interest from. And then, of course, when you got into it, and you got into it heavy, that got me back into it. So you're partly responsible for that.
I'm glad I could help. Much to my wife's dismay. It's interesting. I think back over, our childhood and stuff, and photography was just not popular in our family. I mean, I think you and I kind of liked it growing up, and we had our little point and shoots. I had a little snappy camera.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it just was not a big deal. I mean, we had a couple photo albums, but we really didn't. There wasn't any angle as far as that. I don't remember anything that kind of got me into it from the perspective of another family member or anything like that, except for the fact that you got into it actually before I did, more heavily. Like you were just saying, Dad bought you that camera, and I actually ended up using that camera in college, the Canon T70, which was a heck of a great camera, and that actually, really helped me out going through my photography classes and so forth. And that just it's interesting how everything kind of weaves together. What gear are you currently shooting with right now?
Right now, I'm in that mode where my family's almost grown. I got one person still at home, or my daughter's still at home. But you're always having to be budget conscious. So I started off small. For a long time, I used a little prosumer camera. I had a blast with it, but I never really got into things that you should get into as a photographer, and that is the learning how to manage your photo manually instead of depending on auto. I did a lot of auto. I went for the beauty of the picture, but you really need to get that control. So I just went cheaper on a budget. I got a Rebel that I'm using now, and it's first generation. I bought that used, and then I have several lenses that I'm using and practicing with. Nothing real major. I just went real budget conscious, and eventually I'm going to trade up. I mean, it'll come with time, but this camera will teach me what I need to know as far as, taking a picture, as far as controlling the shutter speed and, setting up that photo and all the things that you need to do for that. So it'll get me by, but I will be trading up.
Yeah. It's, the one of the things that you touched on there that kind of hit home to me was a couple things actually, but one was that, and one of the things that I really encourage on this podcast, anybody that's ever listened to it, is I come from the old school. So I come from the film days, and that's where my training was. And we learned how to operate our cameras manually. And I'm not saying that everyone has to use manual all the time, but you need to learn it, because if you're just going around on P mode all the time, you don't really understand what's happening. You don't know why you need to use a longer shutter speed. You don't know why you need more depth of field and how to achieve it. You can't answer those questions. And so I recommend people use manual to start with, maybe for 6-8 months, a year, 2 years, whatever. And I guarantee you what'll eventually happen is you'll either stay with it, which a lot of people do just because of the control, or you'll go to one of the other modes like aperture priority or shutter priority. And honestly, what people don't really understand, which is kind of the funny part, is that when you're using aperture priority and shutter priority, you're really still using a semi-manual process. Yes, it's calculating your exposure for you based on whether you choose, f8 or whether you choose on shutter priority, 1/1000th of a second. But it's really, you really still have to know your exposure, because you end up using exposure compensation. So if I'm shooting a white bird in a black background, I'm going to have to compensate for that bird. I'm going to have to actually add a stop or two compensation and plus compensation. And so I've already entered that manual realm. So why not just go there to start with and learn it and get it done? I've never really understood that, and I know it's a personal preference to some degree, but I think it's important, and I don't know. I think you said it as well as anybody could. As far as having the lower end equipment, I'll say this to anybody out there listening, you got to start somewhere, and everybody goes that route. Everybody gets a Rebel, or everybody gets a really inexpensive camera, and through that process, they start learning, oh, I really need this feature, or I really need that feature. And that's where you go to the upgrade process. You don't need the upgrade really until you realize that you have a need. So I would say this, though. That sometimes I think the entry-level cameras are actually harder to use than the professional quality cameras. And the reason I say that is you're always fighting this battle with picture quality. You're always fighting that battle. Whereas if you have a really nice setup, you don't fight that battle as often, because your picture quality is great. You don't have to worry about it. You can underexpose a little bit and still get away with it. You do that with a Canon 7D, for example. You underexpose that image, and it's going to be a mess. It's going to be loaded with all kinds of noise and just muddy colors, and it's going to be terrible. Anyway, so long story short, yeah, if you need to start there, go ahead and start there, but not really a need,
Yeah, yeah, it's just like a lot of different things that a person can get into. You get the most that you can afford. If you can afford a good camera right from the start, go for it. You're still going to have to learn the same things that you need for the budget camera, though. Your exposure, framing up a shot, composing the shot, is all that all goes across all those DSLRs, and you got to have it. You got to learn that stuff. And the only way to do that is through trial and error and asking people that know more than you about it. But if it's buy the most you can afford, If you have to go real budgetary, just try not to go too budgetary. I went too budgetary on a tripod and learned the hard way. You need to have something a little steadier, so I spent a little more, got a different one.
Yeah, the tripod is I'll tell you what, if there's one piece of gear, and you'll probably hear every photographer say this that's been doing it for more than a few years. If there's one piece of gear not to wimp out on, it's probably the tripod, because you use it for everything. It doesn't matter what you're shooting. If you're shooting astrophotography or wildlife or landscapes, macro work, whatever you're doing, you need that sturdy tripod. Without it, you're just fighting a losing battle. And the other thing is, there's stories of people that go out and spend thousands of dollars on an expensive camera body, and then they buy a $50 tripod,
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, I wouldn't trust that thing to hold up my $5,000 camera. So,
No.
It's just
No way.
I don't know why people do that. It's like I would rather see somebody spend $800 or $900 on a body and spend $200 or $300 on a tripod than do that. If you're gonna spend $5,000, you could spread it out a little bit and get some high quality gear. Now you don't have to. I've beat this horse to death. I mean, many times, and that's, you don't have to spend a lot of money to make great photographs. I mean, you can buy, older 1 series cameras, for example, that produce great images, but they were top of the line, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Now they're depreciated. I mean, the cameras depreciate rapidly now because of the electronics in them, but they still make great images. I don't understand it. Somebody will, they'll want to buy a really new camera, but they can only afford $600. Well, if you can only afford $600 and you want to buy new, that's just dumb. Buy used. Yeah, you are getting other people's junk. Sometimes you get a lemon. But if you buy from a reputable place like KEH, which I recommend, or Adorama or B&H, they're going to stand behind their product. You're going to be able to return it in 90 days, get a refund. So, anyway, we've talked gear probably long enough. I talk gear too much on this show probably, but the way I feel about that is, we're 50%, I guess, artist / journalist or whatever, and 50% gear. You can't make a great photograph without gear, and you can't make a great photograph without the creative artistic energy. So anyway, but yeah, harkening back to what you're saying about your artistic background, I think that's going to play well for you when you get going in photography and get more time to actually spend with it, because you can, having that creative artistic side, you can really go far in photography. I don't have that side as much as Rick does, but when you have that side, it really can make a big difference, especially when you're doing scenics and landscapes and stuff like that. Not so much with wildlife. I mean, a little bit with wildlife. To me, wildlife is more of a creative / journalistic kind of endeavor, more than say, still lifes or something like that. So anyway, I'm rambling. Tell me about this. How does photography affect, or I guess a better way to say this, what other influences on your life make it hard for you to get out there and shoot?
Oh, that's a good question, because there's a lot of it. I'm married, I have kids, I have to work for a living. I can't just take pictures. Pictures is a hobby for me, so I can't make a living off of it, so I have to do something else. And those are all those responsibilities get in the way sometimes. I mean, having a family is great. I love that more than anything, but, like work, sometimes you'll get stuck doing mounds and mounds of overtime. You get home after being on your feet for 10 hours, you don't feel like going outside and being on your feet for another 4 or 5 hours. It gets hard that way. So you have a tendency to put it off, and then hopefully you'll get a weekend where you can get out and shoot a little bit. Those are the things that get in the way. And if your family likes to ride around and take, be out in the woods. Like in the fall, my wife she would drive and take me around to all the country roads we would hit and try to take pictures of flowers and trees and all that good stuff. That helps, if they're willing to help you out that way by driving around and stuff. And my wife loves doing that stuff. That helps, but mostly it's just the things that all of us go through. I mean, we all have jobs, we all have responsibilities, and you can't just go out and shoot when you want to shoot. Those are the things that I can think of. Maybe when I get retired, I'll have more time to do that if I still have my health.
Yeah. It's you and I have had this conversation many times, but for the listeners' benefit, it's just one of these things that you got to balance your life. I mean, you got work, you got your wife and kids, you got to spend time with them. It's not just you. It's not just you doing your thing. I mean, that's, I hate to say it, but our world today is very hedonistic in the sense that we try to bring pleasure to ourselves. So that can be a problem, and especially if you're a family man. A lot of the people that we see out there that are great photographers, a lot of them are family men, but a lot of them aren't. And so when you're single, I mean, you got nothing better to do. I mean, I remember what it was like. I pretty much watched TV and laid around and slept and stuff. I mean, I didn't do anything. So you've got tons of time on your hands. And, if you're in that situation, then great, go for it. But for the rest of us, you've got to worry about it. And, I've tried a couple different times going professional. And it's just so difficult in the current climate that we have. I mean, one of the greatest things that ever happened, or two of the greatest things that ever happened to us, was the invention of the internet and the invention of the digital camera. Well, that's a double-edged sword, right? You get the internet killed stock photography, and that was a huge source of income for a lot of photographers back in the film days. And you can still make some money at it, but it's extremely difficult, and it's kind of an insulting process, to be honest. But it was really the internet that really, it wasn't really digital photography that killed it. It was really the internet that killed it, because it was the internet sites that sold images for 25 cents a piece because they could, and the only people getting wealthy off that was the companies themselves, like iStock and Shutterstock and so on. But that's a whole interesting thing, and a lot of people I talk to, I see online, I read their posts and so forth. They all tried to go pro, and it's just not easy anymore. It can be done. There are people that do it, but it's not easy. And again, you're talking about a huge commitment there, and you're talking about, if you go pro, you think you're working hard now. You think you're working hard at your office job or whatever. I'm not talking to Rick personally here, but I'm talking to the audience. If you're doing your office job and you're working 8 hours a day, you think you're working hard now. You do photography as a career, and you will be out pounding the pavement. You'll be making phone calls. You'll be begging people to take your photographs. It's a whole nother problem.
Yeah, and you're trying to. You're wondering where that paycheck's coming from.
Yeah.
Did I make enough this week? Am I gonna eat this week? It's hard. It's so saturated with photographers out there now. There's almost like a non-entry point. I mean, you can do it if you're determined enough, but it takes that determination and no distractions.
Yeah, it does. And I think your family has to be committed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you're going into this thing and your wife's against it and your kids hate you and all this stuff because you're doing photography all the time, that's not going to work. You're going to end up with divorce. You're going to end up with kids that hate you, and you may or may not ever be a successful photographer. So I'm not saying all this to be negative. I'm just saying that's the current climate that we're in, and that's one of the reasons I consider myself a semi-pro. I sell my images when I can. I got a bunch of stuff published, but it's certainly nowhere near a living. It's not even a really even a second income, really. When you look at the money coming in, it's not really even a good second income. But it's fun, and that's why I do it. That's why I do this podcast. I'm not doing this podcast to make money. I mean, really, there's not any money in podcasting. Even if I had, I mean, maybe if I had 1 million listeners or something, I could make some money. But it's just not going to happen. And that's why I do a wildlife podcast. I mean, right there, you've cut your audience and down to a quarter of the photography population, probably. So I don't do it for that purpose. But yeah, the family life is hard to balance. I hear a lot of photographers complain about that. My friend Buck George, same situation there. He gets, he has to balance that family life too. I don't know what else I can say. I mean, this is probably one of the, I gotta say, the reason I'm spending so much time on this is probably one of the number one concerns out there amongst photographers that are trying to do it seriously. Is, how do I break in? How do I become a pro? How do I become the next Ansel Adams? And there is no formula. I hate to say it. It's just, you got to be good. You got to be really good. I think my photographs are pretty good, but you got to be really good. I mean, you got to be beating people like, Moose Peterson, and I drew a blank on his name, but you're fighting it out with the big boys. These guys have been doing it for 20 plus years. They've been doing it. They started in the film days, and good luck. That's the way I always preface it, especially with wildlife. Wildlife is and nature, just nature in general. Wildlife, macro. It's a very niche kind of field, and I just don't know what else to say. Let's put it this way. I don't know if I talked about this in the previous podcast or not, but there was a professional photographer, Art Morris is his name. He's well known. I'm not telling any secrets here. This was out on a YouTube video I watched. He went from making over $200,000 a year in the 1990s to $20,000.
That's huge.
The only reason he stayed afloat, he said, the only way I stayed out of the Walmart greeter job was that he did tours. First of all, that's a big thing now, where you just basically you take people around and you show them the sights and you show them how to photograph the animals. So he did that. He sold books, but as far as like his meat and potatoes, which was selling to magazines, selling to books and stock and all that stuff, it just went dead for him. And it's sad, but in some ways it's sad, in some ways it's not. I mean, there are people that are doing photography now and doing stock that would have never had an opportunity to do it 20 years ago, because it was expensive back then. I don't care what these guys are out there saying that shoot film. They're saying it's not expensive. I beg to differ. I mean, film was expensive. It cost you, if you weren't doing slides, if you were printing, it cost you about $6 a roll. Okay, between $3 and $6 a roll to get processed. And then you had, of course, $5 or $6 for a roll of professional film, and you'd shoot 3 or 4 of those and it'd shoot easily. So you tell me how it's cheaper now. Or cheaper in the film days. I don't believe that for a second.
No, and I got to tell you, I love being able to view a picture in that window and delete it. I remember trying to take pictures and trying to capture that moment, and then you would send your film out to be processed, and you'd wait for that to come back, and then you never hit it. So now you're really having to concentrate on what to do next, to get that picture the way you saw it. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very daunting. I mean, and the thing was, you had the only good thing about it was, well, there's a couple good things about it. One was you were kind of in this elite club, which felt good. There were very few people back then that knew how to use their cameras. I mean, nobody knew how to use SLRs, pretty much. Nobody knew how to do darkroom work. That was difficult, and it took time to learn it. And so I guess you felt like you were more of an elite kind of photographer. Whereas today, when I first picked up my first digital camera was the 1D Mark II. When I picked that thing up and I photographed, my first shoot was actually what was it? It was a butterfly that I shot with it right here in the house. And the first time I saw that LCD panel or LCD screen light up, I thought to myself, "You've got to be kidding me! This is so easy." I mean, and literally that was the first thing that entered my mind. I was like, "This is so easy." I can't believe how easy this is, because I could apply all my principles I'd already learned, and then I could actually see it. Now, we had that back in the film days. It was called Polaroid backs for your cameras and stuff. But that was, again, it was expensive. I forget how many dollars. Like, it's $1 per Polaroid or something like that. So, times have changed, and I know I sound like an old curmudgeon here, and but times have changed, and you either embrace it and move on, or you sit there and talk about the good old days. And it is what it is, I guess, in the end. The other thing I kind of wanted to talk about today is something that Rick and I talked about a couple nights ago, or last night, I guess it was. We were chatting about it. Is the war against wildlife photographers. I don't know when this started. I think it happened with the proliferation of digital cameras and so forth. But I'm hearing more and more of this. It's a bit disturbing. I wrote a blog entry on it about a week ago, I think. And what we're seeing is this trend by some of the organizations like Audubon and other, I guess, quasi-environmental groups, that they're making it very difficult on us. They're putting up, 300 feet, distances between us and the subject. And I think the thing that bothers me the most about it, after talking about it last night, I think the thing that bothers me the most is that they're not even, as far as I know, they're not even engaging the photography community in conversation about this. They're not even trying to find an alternative solution. They're putting up signs saying you can't photograph here. They're putting up all this tape because you can't photograph there. And, one person goes out there. One idiot goes out there and flushes the birds, or you get a group of idiots out there flushing the birds, and now we all have to pay for it. Instead of coming up with a common sense solution, we all have to pay for a few idiots' mistakes.
Yep, that's our world that we live in these days. It's too political correctness has just gone berserk. It's gone beyond common sense.
I am a conservationist, okay, to a certain degree. I've talked. I don't know if I've talked about this on the show or not. I guess I'm probably going to lose half my audience now. I am a conservationist to a certain degree. I'm a traditional conservationist. I believe that we have to take care of the animal population, or we don't have them. If you're a hunter, for example, if you don't watch the numbers, you're not going to have any more deer to shoot. You're not going to have any more elk to shoot. You're not going to have them to enjoy and view. I think there's some responsibility there. On the other hand, I don't think we need to anthropomorphize, or whatever the word is, the animal and make them into a human being. Because they're not. They're an animal. And I don't want them to be human beings. I enjoy them because they're animals, not because they're humans. This whole idea that somehow stand back 300 feet is going to protect that bird. Well, and maybe it does. I mean, I don't know. You go to Gatorland, and the birds live in perfect harmony with people, alligators, and man-made objects. So I mean, literally, I'm like 3 foot from a nest. And then nobody cares. The birds don't care. The chicks don't care. Nobody's throwing rocks at them. Nobody's flushing them out of their nest. It's just ridiculous. Rick and I were photographing one time. I'm not going to say where we were or anything, but we were photographing some birds at this location, and we're getting the stink eye from this guy up on the hill, who thinks he's the police or something. And we're well within regulations. We're not causing the bird any stress or anything like that. But they're just, it's getting to the point now where, and I think part of it is it attracts a certain element of people. It attracts these whistleblower types that are wanting to cause problems and instead of finding common sense solutions. For example, why don't we have blinds? Would they do this for hunting? I mean, I don't know if any folks are aware of this or not, but like for hunters here in North Carolina, they actually have blinds set up for duck hunting. And how they do it is you put your name down, and it's a lottery, and they draw your name, and they say, okay, your name's up, pick your day, this day or that day, and you can go. Okay, so you get that blind for 3 hours that day or whatever. Why not do that for photography? That sounds like a good common sense solution. You have less people in there, but yet you're not closing it down. Nobody wants to talk about it. They just want to enforce. They just want to enact laws.
Silly laws on top of all that. Yes. I mean, they're ridiculous.
And we're not even talking about endangered species here. It'd be different if we were talking about an endangered species. We're not talking about that. We're talking about birds that have high numbers. They're in the least concern status. It's one of the reasons that, honestly, it's one of the reasons I've started doing more mammal photography, because you're getting the stink eye from everybody.
Well, and that guy that gave us the stink eye, he pulled alongside the road in his car. And he sees us down in our little hide, and you can tell we got cameras. I mean, we obviously aren't sporting shotguns or rifles or anything. And he made us so uncomfortable after a while. We got up and started to leave, but the sunlight was getting bad anyway. So the shooting was about done anyhow. So we got up and walked away, and this guy's following us. We're 50 yards away and behind trees, and he's following us in his car, moving along with us. This is ridiculous. This is what a photographer has to put up with these days. It's crazy. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And he's probably calling his buddies, hey, we got some guy down here. Actually, he's watching a bird. Oh my goodness, he's taking a picture of a bird. Somebody call the cops. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying, guys, I'm not advocating that we all go up 3 foot from a nest. And I think that's stupid. One, it is going to flush the bird. Two, you're not going to get any good shots. And two, the dumb thing might attack you. I mean, there have been cases of that. But I think, again, I think it's a cultural thing, like you're just saying. It's a cultural thing. It's the hip thing to do these days. It's the politically correct nonsense that we all put up with. And I don't care what side of the fence you fall on. I don't care if you're a conservative or a liberal. I mean, everybody I talk to recognizes that. I mean, I've talked to a lot of liberals and conservatives, and they all recognize we got way too much political correctness going on in our societies right now. And it's time we just rethink this stuff and come up with real solutions instead of, the government solving all our problems. It's you got somebody, like Artie Morris, who's been doing this stuff for, since like 1983. He is kind of outspoken. He does stick his foot in his mouth sometimes, but he's right. I mean, it's just gotten silly, and you shouldn't have to feel guilty when you go out and take your camera out into the woods. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like, and you're not taking a gun. I mean, right now it's actually starting to. The silliness of it is, it's actually the hunter actually is getting more rights than the photographer is. That's how silly. That's how silly it's getting.
Oh, well, pretty soon it'll be like, I know I'm being a little facetious here, but pretty soon they're probably going to start making us have permits to go out and take pictures. Hey.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I've thought of that solution. It would cut down, certainly in endangered species areas. I could see doing that, just so they know how many people are going out there. But I could even see certification processes for people like Artie Morris that take large groups out. I could even see that. I'll go that far, okay? But the hypocrisy of the whole thing is that's the other thing I want to mention is the hypocrisy of the whole thing. I mean, you have some of these big organizations out there that they use these photographs on a daily basis.
Oh yeah.
You go out to, now I haven't heard Cornell's Lab of Ornithology. I have not heard them. I'm not going to mention any names of the people that I dislike right now, but I haven't heard them causing any problems. But there's other groups out there that are causing problems, and they're using the same photograph. They're using the photographs that these guys took literally 10 feet away or 20 feet away from the bird. I got news for these folks. There ain't no lens made out there that you can shoot a football field away and get great shots. I don't know what dream world they're living in. I mean, maybe if you went to like digiscoping or something like that, but that's not good quality. It's getting better, but it's not that good yet. Maybe we can go that route someday. I don't know.
Yeah, you could turn one of the National Observatory telescopes on a bird or something, and you could zoom in on them.
Yeah, let's all get our telescopes out. Yeah. I don't know, guys. I mean, I think I kind of got up my soapbox on this episode, but it's weighing heavily on me. It probably shouldn't. I probably shouldn't care at all, but I do because, and you know why they're really picking on us, Rick? You know why they're really picking on us? Because we don't have any good groups that stand up for us. We don't have the NRA. We don't have the Audubon. We don't have, we have a couple professional photography organizations and nature photography, but they're not big lobbyist groups. If we had a big lobbyist group, they wouldn't be doing this stuff. I guarantee you. It'd be shut down before it even started. But it's I just don't know. I don't know what to say anymore. I mean, it's just, I guess you just deal with it. You find places that, my advice to everybody out there is if your area is getting shut down, which a lot of them are, is I would first write to Congress. I would at least do that. I probably won't do anything, but go ahead and try it anyway. I would write to the big organizations that have been helpful to photographers over the years, and let them know your opinion, because I think opinions do matter, because opinions are dollars and money talks. Hopefully some of this stuff will get shot down in court. I'm really hoping it will, but I don't know who these people are that think you can. I mean, these 300, you know how far 300 yards is, right? It's a football field.
Yeah.
I mean, 300 feet. It's a football field. It's 100 yards exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I could shoot a mammal that far away, but shooting a small bird, even a large bird like a heron or egret or something, it's next to impossible. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had on this interview. I wanted to kind of, I don't know if I really got into some of the beginner aspects like I wanted to. I got kind of on my soapbox there. Is there anything I didn't cover, Rick, that you can think of as far as, let's just finish up with this. What kind of struggles are you going through as far as the learning process?
The learning process is pretty intense because photography is one of those things that you have to get advice, you have to read about it, but then you have to do it. And it comes back to your responsibilities. If your responsibilities are keeping you from taking pictures all the time, you're losing, you're going to have a steeper learning curve, because you have to learn by doing. You have to go out and experiment. You have to go into certain types of lighting situations and see, okay, what shutter speed's going to work for this? What's the ISO? Everything that you need to be thinking about. And you're going to have to just take pictures and practice, and then you're going to go back to some of your resources, some of your books, some of your people that you can talk to, and say, hey, this, what did I do wrong here? That's the biggest struggle. You have to get out and take pictures. I mean, if you're not out taking pictures, it just lengthens that process of learning, and you're just not going to get where you need to get fast enough. But also, I want to say one other thing into photography. I know we got on some touchier subjects tonight, but as a new person, just enjoy it. You know, if you like, obviously you're doing photography because there's something about it you like. Concentrate on that. Enjoy it. When you have a rough day at work or a rough week at work, hey, maybe you can get out on the weekend for a couple hours and just have fun. Take the pictures that make you happy, that you're happy with, and enjoy it, because that's what it should be more than anything. It's fun. And if you want to be a pro, you're going to have to dig in and work hard and be determined, because it's hard to, if there was a way to make a living off of photography, today I've told my brother as so many times, if there was a way to make a living off photography, I'd be doing it. But it's very difficult, very difficult. Everybody's circumstances are different. But just at the bottom line of it all is enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy the sharpness of your pictures. You know, enjoy all the aspects of it that you really like, and have a good time. And that's it, really. I mean, take pictures, practice, and keep going back to your resources, but have a good time while you're doing it. Don't let it get so upsetting that you're like some of those golfers that go golfing to relax, and yet you'll see some of them want to wrap their golf club around the nearest tree. You know, that's not the way you want to get. You just want to get out and enjoy it. And if it makes you feel like you want to throw your camera in a lake, then maybe photography is not for you.
Yeah, well said. You know, it is all about enjoying it. You know, and that's really what this show is about. It's just about getting out there. You know, and some days it just doesn't work out. You know, but you still have fun. Like I've gone out and come back with zip. You know, I mean, I've got nothing, and it doesn't matter, because every time you go out, it's a learning experience. Every time you go out, you learn that location. You learn the light, where the light falls, and where you need to be the next time you go out. And you know, you can mark on your calendar, okay, I saw this bird this day in this location, and the lighting was coming from this direction. I mean, you can get that specific with it in your notes or whatever on your images. And that's one of the reasons I kind of recommend keeping at least some of your bad shots, because just as a record, you know, that I was there, you know, I took a shot of a bald eagle, or I took a shot of a hawk or whatever. It was at this GPS location or somewhere close by, and this was the lighting conditions. And you can realize, you know, hey, and my problem was, you know, I shot at 500th of a second. I should have shot at 2,000ths of a second. You start to develop that plan, and I'm telling you, it works. It actually works, because I've actually gone back and looked at my old pictures, and like, for instance, when I get ready to go on a trip, I'll go back and look at those old pictures, and they're just like a little roadmap for me. You know, okay, so these pictures failed because I'm not going to repeat that problem again. And you learn. The school of hard knocks is still trial and error, just like you said earlier. Still the best way to learn. And just get out there, enjoy yourself. Don't let people giving you the stink eye give you a bad day. You know.
Yeah, that doesn't happen every day.
No,
it just happens once in a while.
Yeah,
and it's irritating when it happens. But
you know, it's like it's like Chris Rao said, I don't wear camouflage to hide from the birds. I wear it to hide from the people. You know, it's just, and he's not saying that because he doesn't like people. He's saying it because he doesn't want the hassle. But like Rick said, it doesn't happen. I mean, that one day was the only day. I think I may have had another guy that was, I can't remember, but I think that was the only time within maybe a 2 or 3 year period that I had anybody that looked like they're going to make trouble, you know. So it's not that it's a problem yet. It is becoming a problem.
It's brewing.
It's brewing. Yeah. And the positive takeaway is that take positive steps, you know, contact the people, But go out and have fun. I mean, you know what? If somebody does give you a hard time, it's not worth it. Don't fight with them. Just move on. Come back the next day, whatever. Get you some camouflage. Go hide somewhere. You know, it's.
I have my ghillie suit out the next time.
But you know what? The other thing about that too, Rick, is every genre. It doesn't matter what photography you're into. If you're a street photographer or if you're whatever, they all have to put up with people like that. You know, there are people that are just anti-camera. I don't know why. It's a privacy thing or something. I don't know. You're just going to run into those people. They're just people that want to make trouble. Just like you got that guy at work and nobody likes. You know, it's the same thing. But anyway, we're getting up on an hour here on this conversation. So, well, it's probably not really an hour. It's probably more like 50 minutes because we talked a little bit to start with. But
yeah,
I enjoyed it. Enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be there. Glad to help you.
Yep. Yeah. Have a good evening and enjoy work the rest of the week and get out there and take some pictures.
Right on.
Okay, welcome to the Know Your Subject segment, and today I am talking about the Downy Woodpecker. According to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's website, Downy woodpeckers are small versions of the classic woodpecker body plan. They have a straight, chisel-like bill, blocky head, wide shoulders, and a straight-backed posture as they lean away from tree limbs and onto their tail feathers. The bill tends to look smaller for a bird this size, and much different than other woodpeckers. Okay, so how do I attract the Downy woodpecker? How do I photograph the Downy woodpecker? First of all, these are incredibly cute birds. As far as woodpeckers go, generally woodpeckers are kind of big and, you know, pretty, but they're not what I would call dainty. And the Downy is different. The Downy is a small woodpecker. It's much, I guess, cuter, I guess is the best way to describe them. And they're actually not too skittish. I mean, they'll come right in fairly close to you once they get to know, that you're not a threat to them. But what I do is generally how I attract woodpeckers in general is I will use an old rotten tree trunk that I find on the floor of the forest. And sometimes it has mosses on it. Sometimes it's just old and kind of little craggy looking thing. And I'll take and I'll drill, 1-inch holes, 1 to 2 inch holes inside of that tree trunk. I'll stuff those holes with suet, which you can buy anywhere, local grocery stores or home improvement centers, Wild Birds Unlimited, places like that. And then you just fill those holes with that, and you just leave it there in your yard. I'll oftentimes use, to hold it up, you can buy a Christmas tree stand, and you can easily hold up a rotten log that way. They're not heavy. What this does is it provides them basically a treat that they can't refuse. Woodpeckers love suet. And I'll use different types. Sometimes they kind of like the fruitier flavor. Sometimes they go more for the peanutty, nutty kind of flavor. But I will use just about any type of suet. You can also make your own suet out of peanut butter and seeds. And you can just mix peanut butter and seeds together and stuff that in the holes. I wouldn't say it's more economical necessarily, but it is something I'll do from time to time, especially if I'm out of suet and we got peanut butter in the house. If you really are, if you're really conscious about what they're eating, you can actually buy pure peanut butter, not the kind that's made out of shortening. You can buy pure peanut butter. It's just ground up peanuts and use that. Now, The only caution I would say there is in the summertime, it can get really, really hot, and it will actually melt the suet. And so be careful about that whole process. You don't want to have birds with gummy mouths and stuff draining all over the tree. It just makes it look bad. So I like to photograph woodpeckers in the wintertime. I think they look good that time of year. They're hungry that time of year, so you get more of them coming in. I like to generally use a morning light, sometimes afternoon light. One thing you have to be careful of when you're photographing the downy is they do have a red patch. The male has a red patch on the back of his head, and you need to be careful that doesn't blow out. The red channel is known for having problems with blowing out to the point where you don't get any detail. You can have a perfectly exposed woodpecker, but that one patch, it just blows out and it ruins the whole picture. So what you can do is you can either underexpose slightly so the patch doesn't blow out, or another alternative is to use the daylight to your advantage. In other words, if you happen to have a cloudy day, that's a great time to photograph the downy, or any woodpecker. The red-bellied especially is overcast is a great day. What I like to do is I just hit a little fill flash in there, and that illuminates that bird and makes them kind of pop, gives them that little eye sparkle, and it just makes it look good. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell for the Downy Woodpecker. We're running a bit late on time here, so I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. I do want you to please check out my new book. It's available on Blurb. It's available in the iTunes bookstore. I think it's like iBooks, I believe. And consider donating to the podcast. This effort is expensive, not only in equipment, but in time. I have to have a website to store all these podcasts on, and that costs money. So please consider donating. There's a link in the show notes for Patreon. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep spreading the word about the podcast, because it will not be successful unless everyone kind of gets the word out. And I mean, it's a simple process. You just go to my Facebook page, and I'll always have a link there to my podcast. You just click share, and you're done. It's probably the easiest way that you can help support this podcast, and it costs you nothing. The other thing you can do is you can click subscribe. Click the subscribe button on iTunes and leave me a review and feedback. If you have any questions regarding photography, please go ahead and email me. And I may even use your question if you'd like. I can even use your question in a special questions and answers episode down the road. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.